I'm Catherine Flashner, and this is The Truth Is, a podcast about discovering what it means to live your truth. Even when it's messy, when it unravels the plans you thought you had and invites you to step into the unknown. Each week, we explore practices, stories, and conversations that illuminate the ways we find and follow our own path. This is a space to slow down, ask questions, and uncover what's been quietly waiting inside of you. If it resonates, subscribing, following, and engaging with the show really supports me in bringing more people into the conversation. Thank you for being here. Welcome to The Truth Is. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to The Truth Is. Welcome to New Year's Eve. Welcome to an episode that's just me. Thank you for being here. I wanted to take today to check in just from me to you, to thank you for being a part of this season so far. And, this time of year for me, especially after the chaos of the holidays dies down a little bit, there's always this liminal space between the holidays and the new year that for me can get a little existential, super reflective, and really on point for this podcast and what it's all about. So felt like a good moment to come on here by myself and share some reflections on the season so far. Now, New Year's Eve has never felt like a finish line to me. It feels more like a pause, a moment to check in and tell the truth about where I actually am. Now, this year was a lot of change for me. And this year also didn't give me too many answers. It maybe left me with more questions, but it asked me to slow down enough to listen. This show exists because certainty stopped working for me. In truth, somehow still did. This year has been a long process of letting go. Not letting go of desire or ambition, but letting go of inherited ideas about what stability is supposed to look like, what makes a life legitimate, what keeps us safe. And I've been taking a quiet bet that underneath all of that, there's something solid, not a better plan, not a clearer roadmap, but a version of us that's there even when the scaffolding comes down. And as I look back on these first 13 conversations, my first 13 guests on this season of The Truth Is, I can start to see some quiet patterns that exist in these very individual journeys of figuring out what it feels like to live true to yourself. And today we'll look at 3 conversations in particular that start to feel like lenses. Together they've shaped the foundation of this show more than I realized at the time. Before I go any further, I want to name something. These first 13 conversations weren't about having it all figured out. That's a big disclaimer that I want to make. This podcast is not about being at the finish line or a mountaintop. It's about being in the middle, somewhere in the middle of life, somewhere in the middle of change, somewhere in the middle of getting honest with yourself. And so, these conversations were about people willing to be honest in real time, about releasing who they thought they had to be, and about telling the truth before it made sense or paid off, about staying with questions longer than is comfortable. And this episode is my way of honoring that collective body of work and the space that's been created here together. One of the clearest things I've learned this year through my conversations, through getting to really be a student of other people's experiences and the wisdom that they've lived into, is that telling the truth isn't this grand gesture that happens in one big moment. It's a practice. And my guest from earlier this season, Joanne Molinaro, the Korean vegan, talks about this practice that she was gifted from her mother at 10 years old. And she reflects on how that practice has stayed with her through the last few decades of making small changes that led to big changes. Here is a look back at my conversation with Joanne Molinaro. But I can imagine fighting for that sense of truth inside was work, and not without stumbles and doubt and struggle. And just like you say today, the fear still exists with me. What is that journey as you look back? And I love you acknowledging that it's still with you at every step.
That's such a great way of putting it. It is work.
Yeah.
And anytime you want to do better at your work, you have to practice. And I think sometimes people think hard work is just hard work. Well, yeah, there's grit, there's determination, there's toughness.
Yeah.
That all goes into conquering hard work. But to do it effectively, you must practice and prepare for that challenge. One of the best things my mother ever gifted me with when I was 10 years old was a diary. And I have been practicing truth-telling to myself since I was 10 years old. I have recognized the value of discarding all of the facades, discarding the narrative, discarding agendas and bias, and having a place that's so safe that I could just say all the ugly things, the things that I don't want anybody to know, what I'm embarrassed about, but also a space where I'm allowed to dream. What do I want to do with my life? What do I foresee? Who do I want to marry? All of those things. And so in my current form, this iteration of who I am, when I write like that, that was an Instagram reel, voiceover. When I write things like that, it draws upon decades and decades of practice of truth telling to myself. And it becomes less challenging then to truth tell to everyone else. That is work. It's like a marathon, right?
Yeah.
People think the hard part is running the 26.2 miles on race day. No, it's the 4 months of endless training that you are doing to make sure that when you toe that start line, that you are ready for it. And I think that's the part that often gets sort of, shoveled under the rug.
You feel the reverence that Joanne has for this practice that she lives into, the sacred practice of learning to tell yourself the truth. And for me, it happens even in one moment. And I think I learned this from my acting work. I was in a play just last weekend in New York, and I was backstage, terrified to go on stage. And I remember just saying aloud to myself, I'm terrified. I'm terrified. And then that could move into, I'm excited and I'm grateful. And I don't know, I look at whether it's a small moment or a big moment, the practice of getting honest with yourself. And Joanne is a beautiful example of that. It takes some courage and it takes some ability to sit in discomfort, to sit in honesty with oneself. And so as I look back on that conversation with her, and I see it in many of my conversations this season, telling the truth and living truthfully starts with the ability to tell yourself the truth. And so whatever that looks like for you, if it looks like opening the page of a journal in the morning and getting honest and then ripping it up and burning it if you need to, amazing. But one of my first big reflections from this season so far is that telling the truth is a practice. It's a muscle. Another conversation I want to revisit from this season is my conversation with my acting teacher, John Markland. When I first started this season, I was really attracted to talking to people that had made big professional changes, which was how this podcast came to be this year for me. I walked away from a corporate career that I'd built over the better part of a decade. And as I look at the last few years, like me preparing for that change, I was simultaneously studying with John Markland on nights and weekends in his acting classes. And in our conversation this season, I asked him, I say, in my months and years of being in his classes, I noticed this distinction in my life where when I was at my corporate job during the day, it felt like I was acting, like I was playing this role. But then when I went into his classes, I felt like I could just be myself. And the reflection he offers back to me is that I've spent a decade playing the role of Catherine, the professional version of Catherine. But then when I come into his classes, it's permission to let go of that identity. And so the second reflection and revelation that I want to offer at this point in the season is something that John articulates really well. And he offers a perspective on what can exist underneath the identities that we build for ourselves. And as I zoom out and take a wider lens on several of my conversations this year, I see that there was possibility for my guest in their story when they loosened their grip on the identities that they constructed for themselves. So here's a look back at my conversation with John Markland. So I would love to ask you, how do you describe what you do and like what the studio you've created is hoping to do?
Let's begin to recognize who you are, what your identity is, why was it constructed the way that it was, and then what are you hiding? What's the truth of who you are behind this identity?
Yeah.
Right? Because in a way we are performing, you know,
Yeah.
even when we feel authentic, given our situation, there's a performance going on. And so I like to think of each class as holding up a mirror at a different angle to be like, okay, well, let's look at your childhood, or let's look at the archetypes of your mom and your dad, or let's look at your belief system and how did you get to that. The unexpressed self is a great one, because it's like, okay, well, you had parts of yourself that fractured or no longer served the identity that you wanted to have.
Yeah.
But let's look back at them, because maybe if we were to reintegrate them, now with the tools that you have, it could actually be a more holistic version of yourself.
Totally.
So I guess that part of my mission is someone to become self-actualized, right? Living closer to their authentic self without such a strong identity. And then there is more of the emotional journey of the work too, which is I feel like I'm there to help people build like impulse trusting, intuition building, reconnecting you to the animal that to me is always much more interesting to watch than anything that's a brain construct. You know, like if you've thought about it, then you're gonna be trying to follow this pattern of what you imagine. Whereas your impulse doesn't have that. Like it's really in and of the moment, so it's unpredictable. And if you are a more authentic version of yourself and you're trusting your animal instincts, then we are riveted because we're watching an animal.
Is I was like reflecting on some of the experiences I've had in your class, like everything from being a gorilla to acting out a scene from Waiting for Lefty as a Smurf.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
To taking a meditative journey about my own death. At face value, especially the first examples, it's like, what? Like, what sense does that make? But in my experience looking back on it, like, there's always some deeper sense I get from my own experience and what's available inside of me. And it's become, I will say, like, by and large in my life, holistically, the big shift has been looking to my own curiosity and felt sense of truth versus anything externally telling me what I should think.
Right.
Is it?
Yeah. Again, it's that glass projection of ourselves that we hold up, right? And this is identity. This is how I want you to see me. This is who I am. Whether you believe it or not.
Yeah.
Right? Often it's elements along the way that have served as protection, right? And so if you're not under the same threat, why are you holding up the same protection? And that's why it can become so limiting when you're trying to grow. You're still holding up this old identity.
Yeah.
That's part of the mechanism of like being a Smurf or being a gorilla. It's not within your identity, right? So Catherine's identity can't play a gorilla. You have to put the identity down
For that to be possible.
100%, which then engages hopefully something more authentic that's coming from the same place that when you used to play as a child, right? Like when a child is playing in a playground, they are free and they are present, but they are also lost in some kingdom or with some monster or in space, wherever they might be, the minute there is a sound or something that causes an element of threat, you see them freeze.
Yeah.
And the game stops, right? Because it has to become fight or flight or fawn or whatever it is. And I think every time we freeze, there is a little synaptic, that's like, okay, with that threat, this is the possible escape. This is the possible protection, whether it's hiding, running, turning to someone else to protect you. And that becomes more and more intricate the older we get, especially when we leave home and we don't have the protection of home or our parents or anything like that. And all we can do is look socially. And so what is most socially acceptable? What is most socially appeasing? What is most socially desirable? What is most, what's that going to be? Is it based upon the college you're going to? Is it based upon the peer friends? And a lot of it is everybody looking at each other, trying to be like, oh no, you're cool. Oh no, I like you. And it's like, yeah, but do you really know them? Just because you have the same social rituals, and most of everyone's doing those social rituals to be this sense of community, sense of tribe. And so it builds and builds and builds. And then at some point you're holding this thing up and you're like, this isn't me. Who am I? Yeah. What am I doing? And I think, I'm not saying this is with you and your corporate job, but a lot of people do come to me who are looking to escape this life that they've built around an identity that is just protection. And so, we have to shatter it.
One of the things I really learned about my own experience through my conversation with John and many of my conversations is that it's not that what I was doing in the last chapter was wrong or misaligned or not truthful, but it was about allowing things to change, allowing old identities to shed, to loosen my grip with them, and to see what was possible if I shifted my orientation towards curiosity, towards presence. And so I love looking at the lesson from Joanne that is just tell the truth to yourself about where you are right now. And then the lesson from John that is, and loosen your grip with what you think you have to be. And then to move into a recent conversation, one that I cherish deeply, with Jedidiah Jenkins. He shows us how curiosity can lead us forward. The moment that I continue to sit with from my conversation with Jedidiah Jenkins is when he talks about how he learned to trust the authority of his own questions. And here's a look back at that moment right now.
I love that your podcast is named The Truth Is, because growing up evangelical and like the Bible was everywhere, and it was like, do you follow the truth? I want you to know the truth. And like the truth was always this propagandized message of, as Rob Bell would say, is your mental furniture organized correctly? Because if it's not, you're not one of us.
Yeah.
And so the truth wasn't a search for the truth. It was a selling of a truth.
Someone telling you what it is.
Yeah, but they did it. They danced around it to the point where they would pretend it's a search. We love doubting, whatever. And it's like, no, you don't. But I have a natural posture towards being curious about my lived experience. I'm not very judgmental. I really haven't been.
Yeah.
And instead of being like, this is right, this is wrong, from the jump, I've been, this is so interesting. This feels weird, or this is, I'm curious about like, why is my sexuality like this? Why are people reacting to me this way? Why are they saying that who I love, God is not cool with? Why?
Yeah.
Whereas like, I just like have never really been sensitive to authority in that way. I've always felt the authority of my own question. Just like, why? I was like the annoying 3-year-old that asked why about everything. And so
that was there from early. That curiosity.
That was there for early, and it might just be, I think it's a combination of my circumstance mixed with my nature. Like some people, when they are in a position of othering, they get angry at the world. Or they get quiet. And my observation of my own othering was curiosity. And I think it really turned me into a writer. And it also turned me into like being silly and funny, because I was like, I just think everything is so funny and absurd. Like, let me just dial it all the way to 10, and at least I won't be kicked out because they're laughing.
Yeah.
It's hard to hate somebody that you're laughing with.
What I want to leave you with from that conversation is this orientation towards curiosity. Jed says early in our interview, I've always trusted the authority of my own questions. And that moment gave me such pause to trust your own questions. And I've shared in reflecting on that interview that I remember being a young girl in middle school and all of a sudden being shy to ask a question, like shy to raise my hand in class because I thought the question was stupid or silly or something like that. And so I censored myself. I didn't ask the thing I was curious about. And in that moment with Jed, I was like, wow, it's amazing how that stays with you. And it becomes a habit that you don't ask the question. And so I want to invite some permission back to embrace your curiosity. That to me is one of the biggest revelations this season has brought me and hopefully you so far. And as I step into 2026, as this show steps into a new year, this is what I'm holding. Integrity names what's true. Presence lets it be felt. And curiosity keeps us oriented. That feels like the operating system of this show. And I'm entering a new year without answers, but with better questions, with more honesty, and with a willingness to stay. This isn't the season finale. It's a thread being pulled, a line being drawn, and I'm going to follow it. Thank you for being here with me on The Truth Is. I hope you leave this episode with something that stays with you, a question worth holding or an insight worth following. If this conversation resonated, subscribing or sharing the episode helps bring more people into the conversation. And connect with The Truth Is at The Truth Is Podcast on Instagram. Special thanks to the people who make this show possible. Editing by Dan Kroll. Video production and editing by Anton LaPlume. Music by Will Savino. Visual identity by Sarah Gaynor and Jonathan Bush. And guidance from my friend and advisor, Natalie Tulloch. I'm Catherine Flashner. Thank you for listening to The Truth Is.